In our previous assignment, we looked at how to create the sprite sheets that we'll be utilizing today. In import, I have the previous sprite sheet that I put into this project right here. And you should have already illustrated all of your pieces, been able to import it, and ideally chopped it into the constituent sprite parts, all of which I showed in the last assignment. Now we're going to utilize this within Unity to not only create our character, but to animate our character. So as a brief refresher, if you import the test.may Unity package that I provided, and then open the scene, test area, then you should get something like this, where if I hit play, I can move with the WASD and spacebar, and the leaves pop up into the air when I run into them. The only difference between yours and mine is that the post-processing effect will probably not be present, and the leaves stack up, and you can actually jump on top of them and interact with them because the layers are not quite the same. I can show just really quickly the difference there. So on the ground, I have a ground layer, which you will not have. You would have to create it. And we also have a leaves layer, which you do not have. And then the reason that that's different is in our project settings. In our physics 2D down here, this is a collision matrix. And I basically made it so that the leaves don't interact with anything except for leaves. And the ground interacts with the leaves as well. Right there. And so that means that the leaves will fall to the ground and they will bonk into each other, but they won't touch our character. So just a little insight into that, but it's not really important for our project, so don't worry about changing that. All right, so what we have to do to start is, presumably you have a sprite sheet that you need to import first. I have a copy of my May sprite sheet that I can just drop in here like that, just to refresh your memory that the import settings are important. So when we click on this, we need it to be Sprite 2D, multiple pixels per unit. What I've set for this project, if I navigate away from this, by the way, without hitting apply, then I'll lose my changes, so I'll just hit apply. The pixels per unit that I've been using are 256, which is quite high, which means that this is going to be a little bit higher resolution compared to our Unity grid back here. So we can type that in to make sure that yours is exactly the same. 256. We could set the mesh type to full rectangle or tight. In this case, tight's probably safer because you might have things that are a little bit too close, but ideally full rectangle is what you should be able to use because you space things out enough. We don't want to generate any physics shapes. And other than that, we're basically okay unless you're using sprite images then, or sorry, pixel art images. Then you want to change the filter mode to point and the compression to none, but in our case, we're going to leave those alone. I'm going to hit apply. So at this point, we would be able to go into our Sprite Editor and slice things up using whatever method. So we're assuming that you've done all of that already, and I don't have to redo it. So over here, I've already got the May sprite all chopped up into different pieces. But the thing that we do have to do in the Sprite Editor still is to edit the bones. We have to make the bones actually function the way that they're intended, which is to bend the limb. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Sprite Editor here. Let's just click on that. And I'm going to go up to where it says Sprite Editor in the upper left and check, and I should have a skinning editor right here. And this is where we edit our bones. Really briefly though, before I do that, I just want to show that this is a package that is imported into Unity along with the May test package that I gave you. And you can load it at any time. If we go to Window Package Manager, and you want to use similar features to these, this one's called the 2D animation package right here. And we can see that mine is up to date, and yours probably should be too. If it isn't, then update it to 3.2.6 if you can, right down there. And this adds a suite of features, including 2D skeletal bones. So that's something that we're going to use. There's many more of these packages, some of which you'll have installed, some of which you won't, but it's worth looking through here at some point to figure out what the available packages are because they extend Unity quite a bit, and you can even load up third-party packages if you want to, if you know what they do or if you buy them from the asset store. So that's going to enable us to set up bones. I'm going to do this example for bone setup on this one that has not been set up, because this one already has functional bones. So I'm going to show what those functional bones look like by opening that up, going to the skinning editor. Okay. And then we have to select something that has bones. So let's see. Preview bones is turned on right now. Oh, I need to go. Whoops, sorry. I need to go to weight slider, for instance. There we go. So you can see these colorful pieces now. Those have bones already attached to them. The other ones do not. So on my entire character, the only things that are using bones are her chest, her legs, and her arms. The rest of them, they don't really have anything attached to them. If I turn this on, it's a little easier to see what we've got here. So I believe that double clicking is the way to enable editing on a single sprite. So like that one, or if I double click over here, or if I double clicked on one that didn't already have bones, then I should be inserting bones into them, but I don't really want to do that. And we're going to start fresh from having no bones whatsoever. But I just wanted to show that the end result is something like this, where if I move these bones around, then it squishes and deforms my sprite according to how dense these points are. And these points are generated for you. So that's just sort of like an example. I'm going to hit reset pose so that it goes back. And then I'm just going to close this and open the blank one. So we'll do this one, Sprite Editor. I'm going to just slice automatic just to get this rolling real quick. And then take a look at what it sliced up and just very quickly delete the ones that I don't want. Those, and I'll change the shape of these couple just to encapsulate this entire piece. And same thing here. And then I would probably name them all, set their pivots carefully, all that good stuff. But as you can see now, just about everything is sliced up properly. Hit apply. And so I can at least do this demonstration with the legs and arms and torso. So I'll name this chest. This is a leg. And this is an arm. Bear in mind that I have this other bent arm down here, which I illustrated along with my reference, which I realized I didn't need. And so I'm only using the straight arm now. And I want to hit apply. So all of those changes are saved. So we do need those defined sprites before we can do any works with bones. We go to the skinning editor. Preview pose is not going to allow us to do anything right now because we can't pose any bones that we don't have. So we'll start on the leg, nice and simple. And we're going to go to create bone, and we have to double click the sprite. So here we are. It highlights, and you can kind of see an orange outline here, which is kind of indicative of how dense the mesh is going to be, but we'll see in a second. So this is the hip up here, and this is the ankle. And what we do to create bones is we click to decide where a pivot point is going to go. And now we have this little arrow attached to my mouse. And I click again to determine where the next joint is going to be, like there. And then I can click one more time down here. And then if I don't want this anymore, if I right click, then it goes away. So I'm no longer placing a bone. So left click to place a pivot point, left click again to place another pivot point, right click to stop placing pivot points. But I could continue here by left clicking and draw a new point and then right click. You can also draw bones outside of your sprite. Sometimes that's a good idea. Oftentimes it's not desirable. We just want to bend this leg. We want it to be able to bend like a tube. So I'm only going to put a thigh bone and a shin bone in this one, but you'll see in the arms, I put several bones in order to facilitate, wobbly arms or more detailed bending of the arm. If I wanted a sharper elbow, then that might help facilitate that. So there's our bones. We can also split bones right here or edit existing ones. So now what we want to do is assign weights and geometry. So this auto geometry button here, it's already kind of been generated for us, but I'm going to just do it again. Auto geometry, and how much detail do we want? How much tolerance? How much subdivide? So we could generate just with the defaults. And so we've gotten that. The way that this is broken up into triangles is to kind of just create a polygon object for us so that this is able to effectively bend it where we want to. And you can see the weights are not great right now, which is okay. You can play with the pose at any point and then just hit reset pose to go back. I'm going to change the subdivide. I'm going to turn it up and hit generate for selected again. You can see now it's denser. And so we potentially could have a smoother or higher detail kind of deformation, but you'll see that you always get straight lines where these polygon edges exist. If you're not familiar with 3D modeling, then that's what these are, polygon faces with polygon edges. So we can't ever get a curve, like a really smooth curve, but that's okay because with enough of these faces, it will appear to be smooth. I'm judging that that's enough density for this leg. We're only going to see it from about this far away. But just really quick, if I turn this far down, just want to show you what will happen. We get big, chunky faces, and so we see more steps as this thing turns. Really, for efficiency's sake, you want to pick a low enough number that it's not going to drastically impact the amount of time it spends calculating, but the defaults were just fine. So something around here is going to be fine for our purposes. Now, auto weights, again, have already been generated for us, but the weights are how a bone takes ownership of a point. And you can see these little blue dots, they're the points. A bone is saying, I am going to move that point between 0 and 100% when you edit it. So this root bone moves everything because either a point belongs directly to it or it belongs to its child, which it's moving. This child bone, though, will only move some of them. And so we can see in the yellow or green, whatever we want to call this color, it's moving those points 100%. But over here where it starts to change color, it's moving at 50% or less. And that's what weights are all about. By editing the weights, we can make this smoothly transition more nicely or more specifically. So we could move just the inside and not the outside or something like that. So we're going to just hit generate and see what it does. Okay, so generate just kind of smoothed that out a little bit. I didn't even reset the pose when I did that, and you don't really have to. Okay, so you can see it looks a little bit more elastic now. Normalize is for making sure that all of the weights are between 0 and 1. Sometimes they can go outside that range and you can get problems. Just be careful if you see something weird happening, probably hit normalize. Our weight slider is our ability to give more or less influence to our bones. So our mode is add and subtract bone 1 up there or bone 2. It's set to normalize by default. You should probably leave that on. But I'm going to slide this and show you what happens. See, all of the points are now becoming more yellow. All of the points are becoming more red to the point where the yellow bone doesn't really do very much. I'm going to leave it about here just to show. It's not really possible for us to take away influence from that yellow one entirely because there's no other bones to share with. And so, I mean, if I go down to 0, what'll happen? Okay, so that works all the way down to 0, but sharing is not really something this can do because it's either going to belong to this bone or the other one. So if I go to bone 2 now, turn it all the way up, so now everything's yellow. That's fine, but let me undo. If I turn it up just a little bit to where it's partially yellow, when I let go, it's all yellow because it's normalizing. It's saying you're between 0 and 1, and if you're the only thing that has influence, then it's 100%. It can't be any less than that because you're not sharing with anything. So let's go to bone 1 again, and I'm going to slide up. Now it's just affecting everything because there's no region, there's no territory for this. So we can have it half and half like this, which is really weird. But ideally, we want it located in a certain place. So this is messed up. Let's reset the pose, go back to auto weights, and generate them again. Back to generated weights. Cool. So what's this slider going to help us do? Okay. So for bone number 2, the yellow one, if I want to give this a little bit less influence, hopefully some of these transitions are now more red. Okay. It's really hard to tell though. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Hard to see. If I turn it up, then ideally they're going to be more yellow. So now that one has had a detrimental effect. We don't want yellow to have more influence over our entire geometry. We only want red to influence the first half. Okay? Let's regenerate auto. Okay. And that should be fine. I didn't reset the pose, but it looks good to me. Let's do the weight brush instead. So here I've got a brush of a certain size. The size of this brush can be determined right down here by clicking and dragging. Probably want it to be a little bit smaller, like that. How hard, so the brush can be blurry or it can be hard, as in putting its value directly on anything it overlaps. And the amount of steps, I'm not entirely sure. Brush step size, I don't know. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. So we've got modes for this brush though. Add and subtract, grow and shrink, and smooth. Smooth is usually what I use the brush for, because the auto-generated weights are fine, but sometimes they need to be eased a little bit. So this leg is going to be bending one way or the other. We don't really know because it's a symmetrically drawn leg. But look, when we bend it beyond a certain distance here, we start to get a pinch in the instep of the leg, whichever side that is. And it would probably behoove us to smooth that a little bit. So, you know what I think step is meant to represent is strength of the brush. So I'm going to just click and drag around here a little bit. Let's see, did that do anything? Click and drag around here. What it should do is try to spread out the weight a little bit more evenly, but I'm not really seeing it do anything. So let's try grow and shrink. See what that does. Oh, and it may be that my brush is very, very hard too. Now I'm wondering, is hard 1 or is hard 100? I think hard is 100, so this should be soft. So right now my influence is bone 2, and I'm on grow and shrink. So that should mean that the influence is growing across the new things that I'm overlapping. And it looks like that's the case. So we'll do this one. So I should grow bone influence 1. So as I paint down here, we should get more red influence. And maybe I need more steps to see more difference. So let's try that. Still a little bit hard to tell. Add and subtract is a little bit more obvious. So with bone 1, hardness is very, very soft, but that should be fine. Step size, large enough. I should be painting more red influence into this place. I don't really see it doing anything, in fact. I'm a little confused as to what's going on right now. Oh, that did sort of work. Yeah, we've got that. Let me just turn the step size up a lot higher. You seeing anything? Do I need to reselect, deselect? Maybe it's the normalize, having it normalize on all of the time. Yeah, it's very odd. I'm not actually seeing any changes taking place. So I think maybe something's wrong. I'm going to hit apply and then try this one more time. Let's go reset the pose. Preview pose. Okay, I can double click a different, come back to this one. And let's try weight brush again. Add and subtract bone 2. Okay. Yep. I may need to make it harder. Let's make it middle. Okay, hardness. It's apparently it's to do with influence. And then I don't know what step is. Is it the opposite? Okay, well, hardness was the reason. I thought that would make the brush blurry, but apparently it didn't. So now we can see it looks hideous. Let's go to smooth now. Okay. And you can see what happens is it starts to share the influences around it. It starts to blur them together to say if my neighbor has more red influence, I will have a little bit more red influence. If my neighbor has more yellow influence, I'll have a little bit more yellow influence. And so it makes it gummier. Okay. That's oftentimes all you need to do is paint in the influence into a new place or smooth the influence in an existing place. Okay, so now that that's working properly, there we go. Let's auto weights one more time, generate, go to the brush, and I'm going to use smooth to see if we can't fix this pinching area. So it's better to pose it a little bit and then try to use your brush. So you can see what's happening as I'm smoothing here is that we're losing a little bit of geometry here. It's sort of pinching down a little bit more, but it's pinching more gradually. So at least we're not getting one hard, ugly pinch. So it's like this, kind of like a balloon animal. That might be desirable or it might not be. It depends on your outlook. Okay, so what I could do instead, let's go to add and subtract bone 1. I could try to preserve. I'm going to turn the brush size down just a bit. I could try to preserve the shape of the red side for longer, all the way to down here, and then smooth this last little remaining bit to try to make it look better. So you can see the red is going all the way down there. And let's do it for the yellow as well. So for yellow, I'm going to try to preserve, oops, sorry, that was the wrong one, bone 2. Try to preserve the yellow region, their territory, right? So now the two of them are just not sharing at all. Okay, so now we're going to try to just smooth out right there, just right in the middle geometry, a little bit, and tiny bit there because I want it to sort of fade off. If you click multiple times, you can probably hear the mouse clicking. Then it does the operation again, which can smooth it further and further and further, which I find to be better than trying to set the influence just right. So the difference is now on this side, we have a sharper, more defined pinch, and over on this side, we have a generally more gummy kind of shape, which I can drive further by just smoothing more and more and more on this side. So I'm just clicking again and again and again on this side to smooth it a lot. There we go. So you can see the difference of a more elastic bend and a more pinched bend. And it depends on what you want for your character. So try to think through it. Sometimes you can get clever and have the influence extend beyond what would essentially be the kneecap or the back of the knee or the elbow to try to get it just right. This is one way to do it. Okay, let's look at the last tab here, this bone influence tab. I believe that this is where we could just view, which I don't know what the point is because we were already viewing it in the other ones, weight slider, weight brush, bone influence. What I do like to do though is with weight slider, I like to use the smooth mode if I need something to bend like a rubber hose. And I like to apply that instead of just using the brush at all. So I'm going to auto weights one more time because that was a good way to show how you can edit it personally with the brush tool. But oftentimes the slider is going to do a good enough job. So again, we've got add, subtract, grow, and shrink, and smooth. And I'm going to choose smooth. And I'm going to bend this a little bit. And then I'm going to turn up the amount and just watch the shape. So all the way up, we get the gummiest possible bend, which in this case might be what we want. We might want the influence to be just a gradient across the entire thing, just a little bit, and it sort of smooths everything that it's able to smooth, everything it's able to find. So I'm going to turn this way up. And if I keep doing it again, again, and again, it gets even more gradual, even more smooth, to the point where when I bend this, I'm bending the opposite side. That's probably too far. Okay, we don't want that to happen. The bones are no longer fully representing visually what we've got. Although, look how nice and smooth that bend is. It does end up pinching eventually, which is why we put in multiple bones if we really want a nice deformation. But this kind of movement could be close to what we want. So sometimes I'll do that, and then I'll go over to the weight brush. Let's do add. So with bone 1, I'm going to add 100% influence just around this cap here, just like that, so that I can hit that smooth slider again and retain how smooth it is throughout the middle while just easing the start and stop. And I'll do this for bone 2. It's not really as important for bone 2, but I'll just go ahead and do it. So I'm adding on full influence on bone 1 and bone 2 just at their start and end points because we don't want them wandering away. Come on, there we go. Sometimes you got to click multiple times. It's hard to hit some of these individual vertices. So now let's do the slider. Set it to smooth again. You can see just a little bit, and now those tips are held in the right place. It's just repairing that little end. If I go too far, they'll wander away again. We don't want that. So I'm just going to go right about to here. And then if there were little errors, I would go back to the brush and just use the smooth brush and just tap a few times. So like right here, just a little bit. So let's see how that looks. So the tip of the yellow is maintaining nicely. The tip of the red is staying put. And we get a nice gummy bend in the leg. This is probably fine for our purposes. It is ugly, right? You can see this pinch. That's ugly. If you want this to bend fully in half all the way over like this, we're going to have to do something else. And I'm going to show you that on the arm. Okay, so you decide if when you're animating your character, you're not going past 90 degrees or so. That's not going to be a problem. And if you knew directionally what the front and back of the leg were, then you could augment this so that the front looks beautiful like this, and the back looks more like a pinch, like we were showing earlier. I don't really know what the front or the back of this is, and I'd like it to be able to go either way. But just for one last example for this leg, if we knew the left was the front, that looks great. And if we knew the left is the front, the back looks terrible. So let's use our brush, and let's do add and subtract. And I'm going to add for bone 1, the red one, all down through here, like that. I'm going to add for bone 2, all down through here. Okay, so we're doing our pinch thing from before, right? And then I'm going to use the smooth brush. I'm probably, let me unbend that just a little to see how far did it go. Okay, I do want a little bit more. Sorry, bone 1 here and here. Okay. The rest of these neighboring vertices, by the way, if you've got texture, they're going to matter because they're going to stretch and pinch and look awful. But since I don't have texture, it's just color, they're probably not going to matter in my case. But now, just silhouette-wise, we've got a really nice silhouette with a pinch in the back and a smooth shape on the front. But we want to fix all that overlapping geometry. So now I unbend it just a bit to about here, used my smooth brush, and I'm going to need to probably reduce the size again because this gets really fiddly. I just want to smooth these few vertices so that it's not so crazy looking. Smooth that one. And then very light touch. So probably let's turn hardness down so we can get less influence. Kind of like that. Even less probably. And I might need to re-add a little bit because I went too far with that. So let's add. I keep doing the wrong bone over and over. Bone 1, not bone 2. There we go. And go back to smooth. So sometimes you got to turn this hardness really far down. So that's nice enough. It's still going to overlap like that because that's the nature of a pinch, but it's the choice you got to make because we're not going to get it to be absolutely perfect. But we can help by smoothing out these the secondary row. So now I'll leave the hardness right where it is and just smooth out a few of these. A little higher. There we go. So as we click, they're going to close that gap a little bit so it's not stretching so much. It actually doesn't look like it's doing very much. Let's turn it up. No, nothing. Okay, well, perhaps that's as good as it can do. Okay, so as we pinch it here, I could continue smoothing these few to try to undo that pinching, but I think it just makes it more obvious that there's a transition here as you do that. So I don't really like it. I prefer to smooth these neighbors a little bit so that they gradually transition. Let's do this one. And now I do need to turn the hardness far down. There we go. So it could be a real balancing act. If you want to be very picky, feel free. But this will take you some time to get as close as you possibly can. And that production time might not be worth it, or maybe it is. Okay, so that's about as good as we've gotten so far. And turning this hardness very, very far down enables me to try to sculpt this. In fact, I think I lost influence there for some reason. Yeah, I don't know why. So, whatever. You're thinking about how close up you're going to see this object. This is just the leg on the character. We're going to be way back here. So if we preview our pose, then it gets rid of some of those weights. You can see how it's working nicely enough. This direction doesn't work as nicely, but this one works a little bit better. And we could always add more bones to solve that. So there we go. I'm going to reset that pose. And now let's work on the arm instead. So for this, we're going to want to create bones. Right click so I'm not accidentally doing that. I've still got this sprite selected, so it's trying to create bones for that sprite. I'm going to have to go to preview pose instead and double click on this, then create bones. So I'm creating it for the right geometry. And in this case, this is the shoulder, that's the wrist. And so I'm going to start right where I want the whole arm to rotate inside the round shape of the shoulder. I didn't mention that earlier, but the reason these are pill shaped is so that I can rotate them and they don't kind of lose their place. You could put it way in the end here, but then are you ever wanting to see the round shape of the hip? This is just going to be pushed underneath the hip shape. For the arms, we actually will see the round shape of the shoulder if she shrugs outside of her clothing. And so I want to make sure that that pivot point's right inside here. So clicking. I'm going to add multiple bones. I'm going to do it with split bone though, so that you can see that functionality. We could just click 1, 2, 3, 4 times. But I'm just going to put one right in the middle, right here, and then one on the wrist, and right click to exit. Then I'm going to choose split bone, and if you mouse over, you can see this is where it will create new bones between your start and end points. So I'm going to put a new bone right here, basically 50-50 to smoothly transition the entire arm, and right here. This will make animation a little bit more detailed, but also a little bit more labor intensive because you have to pose all of them instead of just a couple. Let's do auto geometry. See how dense it is. And remember, given that our paint weighting was a little bit fiddly, how many points do you want to be dealing with and how much detail do you want? Okay, let's turn up the subdivide a bit this time. There we go. So it's a bit smaller. And then auto weights have already been completed, but if we generate, they're slightly different. Sometimes we can normalize them. I don't see any change right now. This one, I definitely do want a nice smooth transition between all of those bones because no one of them is the elbow. I know yellow is probably the one that you would consider to be, but I'm actually going to treat them all as a big tube. I don't want this kind of bend for her arm. I want a nice smooth bend. So like this. We're going to move all of them at the same time. Let's do weight slider. And this is a good pose to preview in because we can see how segmented this already looks. Smooth is set. Why do I have... that was odd. I'm going to undo. Okay, that went away. I think I have a vertex selected right now, which I don't want. Well, let's find out how this works. Yeah, it's just moving that one. Okay, how did I accidentally select a single vertex? Can I select all vertexes? Okay, I'll just select them all. Sure, whatever. There we go. So you can see that difference. We're not getting some of the issue with losing focus on the endpoints now because we've got more bones to share from. But I'm going to turn it up quite a bit. Right about there looks smooth enough to me. There's a little bit up here that I don't like still. Maybe I could select just that region, let's see. I guess you can. How about just this region? Kind of cool. So that could be a nicer way to fine tune this. I haven't really played around with this too much, but there you can see, right? It's a very, very gummy now, but posed correctly, let's reset it. It looks like a nice flexible arm. So I'm going to aim this up, try the opposite way. This one's probably, you can be more liberal with that middle one and just be a little bit more gentle with the other two, where this one, can tolerate a nice solid bend like that. But if you pose these ones, then you get a more rainbow bridge kind of arc. Okay. And if you wanted even more than that, you could, but you'd be getting awfully picky at that point. So this will allow us to pose our arm in a nice flexible way. We're not really losing very much volume this time because we're sharing it between so many bones, which is the benefit of doing that. And this is even done in 3D rigging sometimes. Remember that we have to hit apply before we ever close the Sprite Editor, otherwise we'll lose our progress. And then I did want to also apply bones to the chest. I'm going to go back to preview pose, double click, auto geometry. See, this one's very, very big. That'll do. Okay. And then we want to create bones from the navel to the mid to the upper chest. This is just for a slight bending appearance. Right click to get rid of that. And let's do auto weights. Generate. Normalize. Not even sure. That's already fine right there. We don't really need any more than that. But just for the sake of doing our due diligence, I'm going to go to weight slider, smooth, and turn up the amount just a bit. Okay. I actually don't like what's happening. So I'm going to just select these transition points here, and probably on the other side here, I'm holding shift. Yeah, so we get both sides, and now let's just turn those up a little. Wow, I really don't like that. That doesn't look good. Maybe this entire last rank, like that. All right, let's test that. Let's see. It's still a little ugly down here. But for the most part, that helped. Okay, why is smoothing making it go the opposite way? Very strange. And on this side, so it's pinching on this side, the stomach side, and it's smoother on this back side. I'd actually rather it be the opposite way. So let's do this again. I'm going to reset pose, generate auto weights one more time, get my weight slider, select, I guess, all the vertices because it won't let me deselect, and smooth just a little bit. I'm going to undo that and just check. Is this better? It's better in the front. It's worse in the back. So it's the auto geometry that's been generated is causing some strange error right here where it just looks bad. I'm going to select these to see if smoothing can help that. Let me try that again. Okay, right there. Sometimes it matters where you let go of this button. I'll grab these and see. There we go. So just a little touch was helping a lot more than cranking the slider all the way over for some reason. It still looks quite ugly, but she's not going to really be bending back that far. It's really only going to go about this far. So probably this is going to be okay. I'm not entirely convinced. Let me grab 2 ranks. Turn it very far up. Okay. Well, I hate that. Okay, so I'm going to undo. Try grabbing everything one more time just to see if that's a possibility. So it looks good bending forward. It looks very good this way. This side, though, if I turn it all the way up now, that looks hideous. I'm just going to leave it as is because I think the best case scenario without doing tons of work, and really it's just for a little adjustment. So I don't want to mess with it. I don't think it's worth it for me to mess with it. So we'll just leave that, hit apply, and all of these changes should be saved. We don't really need bones anywhere else. We could put them in the hair, we could put them in the ears, but it's better to leave things simpler oftentimes than it is to put bones all over the place that you don't need. So, oh, okay, one more thing I just thought of. You can do clever things. I don't really want you to, but you can do clever things like apply bones that have influence to other objects so that you can move them around like the eyeballs inside of the skull. I don't recommend that you do that. If you want to, mess around and see how you can, but I just want to mention that it was something that's possible. So now we're going to show how to put all these sprites into our scene to start assembling our character. The first thing we have to realize is that our player is a prefab. If you don't know what a prefab is, then we have to go down into the assets folder. We have a prefabs folder, and we have the player just kind of sitting right here. A prefab is sort of like a cookie cutter template that we've established that all of this stuff here should be able to be duplicated exactly as it is, complete with its name, its layer, its sorting, all of its components, and all of its children too. So you can see in our hierarchy, there's this little right-facing arrow here, and if we click that, now I'm editing the prefab. You can see the environment disappeared, and we've got all of the hierarchy showing. this is where we would do permanent changes to a prefab. If I step out of here, what we want you to do is create your own version of this player prefab. And so we're going to have to unpack this to begin with. Unpacking will essentially say, you on the scene, don't be a prefab anymore. Stay exactly as you are, but don't be in any way representative of this thing in the folder. Okay, so we're going to right-click that, and we're going to say unpack prefab. So there it goes, and you can see it's no longer blue, and there's no longer an arrow here. So this is just an object in our scene called player. Now, we're going to rename this so that you can turn in your own player prefab. Let's just name it player underscore and then your name. So your name, not literally put your name, first, last name, underscores, hit enter. This will be your new prefab, the thing that you're going to turn in at the end of this. Okay, this player anim object, leave this be, but anything underneath that, delete, right? So starting at the hips, my character is anchored from the hips so that all of her visual pieces move around. We can see here's the chest object, which I could move around. Here's the bone, which I could, it's a little hard to pose so far away, but we could rotate it and we could bend her, right? This is how this character worked previously. If we want to move the bones, we do it from here. So all of that we're going to get rid of and we're going to reconstruct. Okay. So starting on hips, I'm just going to hit delete. So now I've got player with your name. It has all of the functionality still present. We could play with it. It's got the right tag, which is important because it's how things are being identified in our environment. And then this player anim character, it has an animator and a transform, which we actually never use here. And it's got a controller. I actually want you to get rid of that controller as well. So click this little target and just choose none. And we're going to create our own animation controller, because if you don't, this logic will apply to all of these clips, which are going to be for the wrong character now. So we want your logic to apply to your character pieces. Okay, so here we have our empty character now. You don't have to make this a prefab right now, but we could, and we could work inside of it and it would be fine as long as we were inside the prefab. What we're going to do is just go ahead and assemble this on the stage here, and we'll make it a prefab last. So in our project, in our import folder where you've put your sprite, we want to open up this list and we want to start dragging those pieces out and assembling them. And they all need to be children of player anim and fit right in this area. So this Capsule Collider is the physical presence of our interactable character. So your character needs to stand right on this spot, centered right on this line. And their head needs to go no higher than here. If you do need to adjust this a little bit, you can. We can go to the Capsule Collider 2D, edit collider, and then you can change how tall, whoop, I missed clicking it. Click this button. You can change how tall this is by clicking and dragging this, and how wide they are. But don't change the bottom. Actually, so I just clicked that, and it started dragging it out to one side. We don't want to do that. We want them to remain centered here. So instead, your size in X is what we'd want to do for that. But if you did size in Y, it goes through the ground. So I would just recommend dragging that little point. I'm going to undo those changes. I don't really want to change this because I'm using the same character, but you could adjust it just a little bit. That's safe. And then click this button to finalize that. All right, so we're going to start dragging these objects onto the stage. We don't have to parent them right away, but we could drag them right onto this object like so. And they kind of appear where that object is. This one is centered on the ground. And so that's where this has appeared, this head. And this is the part where if you didn't name things, you're going to regret it, because that's the name that this sprite just received. Okay, so I want to show you, if you look in this list, I've got arm, chest, leg, and then may test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc., which is bogus. Okay, over here in the correctly set up character, I've got may arm, may boot, may character 1. Okay, so that's a bad example. Huh, why aren't these named? In my real example, they all were named properly, so I don't know why those aren't. Maybe something weird happened, but you really should name all these. So For just a moment, I'm going to go through and name them. It only takes a second. If once you realize you've done it, you really need to fix it. So you probably should just take a moment to do it. And we don't need may anything. Just use head, right? Eyelid, etc. And now back in the scene, there we go. We've got the proper pivot point. Some people had trouble, by the way, last time. There's a button up here called pivot. If you have this set on center, it's going to ignore your pivot point. If you have it set on pivot, it will use your pivot point. So try to get it to use your pivot point. So I'm going to delete this because it's got the wrong name. You can see that when I drag out this now, it will have the correct name. There we go, by default, which is really nice. So here's the head. What we got to do is assemble all these pieces, and we've got to have them ordered correctly on this default sorting layer. Go ahead and just use the default one. Sometimes we create one special, but just use the default sorting layer. Know that the ground is on the default sorting layer at 0. So if you want your character to appear in front of the ground, it's got to be higher than 0, every single piece. Okay. So our head, I'm going to just set it to start off with. There's quite a lot of numbers that you can use for this. So I'm just going to set the head to 100 as our default starting point, and that'll give us plenty of space to play with. I'm going to drag on this yellow backing, and I'm going to make it a child of the head, and I'm going to make the backing something like 90 so that I've got space to put things inside the head, like this eyeballs. And then line it up so that it occludes perfectly like that. This one doesn't have a name, but also I don't ever want to remove it, so it's fine. We're going to put pupils as a part of the head. Okay, so here's one. When you drag them out, they might be invisible, and so it needs to be a number greater than 90. So you do 91. And you may want to name these after you place them if you have 2 of them on the character. So arms, legs, eyes. So this eye, I'm going to do I underscore, and then I'm going to duplicate it, Control D, I underscore R for right. That way I can tell the difference between my 2 eyes. I recommend placing them at the same place inside the eyes so that you can make them look around like that. I think if we scale, yeah, they scale from their own local area, so you can make the eyes dilate and things like that, which is really nice just by selecting both at once. I'm going to just place them here by default. Let's get the nose. So I'm placing them directly onto the object that I want to parent them to, which is one way of doing it, but you could just drag them onto the stage and then place them in the hierarchy, but do not neglect the hierarchy. This is how our character will work. So we want the order in layer to be above the layer of the head. So the head is 100, so we want at least 101, so it can be in front of the skin. And I'm going to rotate that just a little bit right there. This is where the nose will sit. What else do we have for the head? Well, we've got the brows, which is going to be the same sort of thing. They're never going to interact with the nose, so we could make this 101 as well. We're never going to have a danger of the 2 overlapping in a weird way. Okay. We've got ears. So the ears need to appear behind the skull, but in front of the eye yellows. Okay, or no, I'm sorry, behind both of those, excuse me, because we don't want them to appear inside the head. So if I did, let's just first say 95, right? It's behind my face, but in front of my eyeballs. It's really, really weird. 91, might have it sometimes behind a pupil, sometimes not. Very strange, but we don't want it too far behind the head. So 89 is 1 step behind the yellow of the head. And we can place that right about here. And you should probably test the function of some of these as you're building. Just rotate a little bit, see if it works properly. You might need to move your pivot point. If you get little gaps like that, then we can move the position just a little bit. It usually looks fine. So if we wanted up and tall, we can move it over here, and we can even scale. Right now the scale is set to local on this one, which actually doesn't work very well on this object, but sometimes it can be a global. Actually, I don't see that option up there. I might be just thinking of a different environment. But I know that movement can be global or local. I guess scale wasn't able to be. So let's just get that lined up in a place that looks nice, just about like that. Same thing for the other ear. The ears might overlap. So you might want to think about which ear would you want to appear in front. And if both of them, for instance, were back here, in the case of my character, they're the same color, so it's not really going to matter. But I did mention in our previous video that we could color these differently just by changing this color right here. So if I choose a slightly darker, like that, just to give the character a little bit of depth with one of those ears, now it suddenly matters, and we can see that one ear is overlapping the other if we wanted the ears back like that. So I probably want this one to be the rearmost, and so I'm going to set that to 88, and then this one's going to be 89. So they're both behind all of the internals of the head, but if they overlap for some reason now, I could have them doubling up like that. I don't really foresee that, and I don't think I used it in my particular case, but it's fine. Just a nice little thing to think about. There we go. We've got the head. Everything except for the hair. And again, the hair definitely might interact with the ears. And so you want to think, where does it fit? Probably in front of this, but behind that one would make sense to me. So this is 88. That one's 89. So let's make this 88, and I'll make the other one 87. So now this hair will be in front of the rear ear and behind the front ear, just like that. And I did mention how I wish I had illustrated more space on this, but you can rotate it and move it a little bit to get the right effect. And then if the ears happen to pose overlapping, now it looks proper. All right, there we go. We got our head. I feel like something's weird about her ear pose. Probably this ear being up. Let's lower that a little bit. Okay, that's a better default head, I think. So this entire head now controls everything all at once. All right, so if I move it or rotate it, the head can go wherever I want it to. This object here is never meant to be moved. You could name it something like don't move, or just put it on the bottom of your list if you want to. We can do that just by dragging down. Drag this last one. If you drag past the last entry, by the way, it usually unparents. Sometimes it won't. Just be careful as you're dragging things. Look at the little blue line with that handle. That gives you an indication of where it's going to go, so you might accidentally unparent it entirely. So try not to do that. It doesn't really matter what order these are in, except for they will appear that way in your animation list, most likely. So you might want to put lesser used things like face down at the bottom. I'm probably not going to animate face or brows. Hair, ears, and eyes, I'm going to animate more. So I'll leave them towards the top of this list. Okay. So we can collapse that for now because we're done with everything inside of there. Oh, we didn't put the eyelids. I'm sorry. So the eyelids are an interesting case because they're not going to appear most of the time. So here's an eyelid. I want this to appear over top of the face. So we want this to be 101, just like the facial features. But we may want the facial features to overlap. So we'll make the facial features, so that would be face and brows 102. So that the eyelids are behind that in case I move the whiskers or something. And I don't know why it's so picky and precise when I illustrated this. I guess that's good, but I could just scale these up just a tiny bit to cover any potential yellow. So here's an eyelid, and here's another eyelid, and I probably want to name them left and right. But then I also, rotate it just to look nice, I also want to turn off their sprite renderer or turn their color to alpha of 0. So this is one way. This is a fading way. Since an eyelid doesn't fade, we probably just want to blink these, and that would be turning the sprite renderer on and off. So the object is still here, it's just not rendering, and that's a potential way to animate. So I'm going to say eyelid left, eyelid right, or R. Oops. I want to be consistent and put an underscore in there, just so it looks nice. And then we're just going to turn both of these sprite renderers off and remember that we have the ability to blink her eyes like that. If we don't remember that, well, then we'll never end up using that, and that'll be embarrassing. Okay, there we go. So I started from the head because it was a good example, but it's not really where I start the root of the body typically. That would be the hips, and you can see that in my test character. I drag the hips up here to player anim. I don't really know how far off the ground our legs are going to be, but I'm just going to place it vaguely in this position. When you parent things, they will end up moving with other things, so it's not going to be a big deal. But I'm just going to place them here to start off with. And then the chest is the first child that I want to be underneath the hips. I'm going to move the whole sprite right up here to where it kind of makes sense. And I may just take the head and move it up for now out of the way so that I can set up the body first. So you do move the chest first, but we should have bones on this chest. And I'm not seeing them, so that's a bit odd. Hopefully they're going to show up. I need to check my Sprite Editor, make sure I added bones to that. Skinning Editor, yeah, I did. There they are. So why aren't they in the hierarchy? They should already be appearing in the hierarchy, and it's weird that they're not, because we need to parent things to them. Try the other one. Not sure. There's possibly, okay, so what I can do here, I'm having trouble. I'm going to hit save on the scene, right? So that'll save my progress. I could also save my prefab. At this point, player your name. There we go. So we got that progress saved. I'm going to enter into this other prefab just by double clicking. And I can see there's the bones right there. So what's the difference? Here's the difference. There's a component called Sprite Skin. So this component is what's making those bones visible. And we need that component on anything that's going to use bones. So let's go back to our character then. Now that I've made this a prefab, I'm going to want to enter into it to edit. Okay. And I'm going to select the chest, which has the bones. I'm going to add component, and you could just type in Sprite to search and then find Sprite Skin. And I think create bones will take them from the Sprite Editor. There they are. Okay, so now, there we go. Okay, so that create bones button. And now we've got hips, chest, which we're not really going to try to animate, but bones we're going to try to animate. So this one just for the placement, just for the initial placement, and then the bones for rotating the whole thing, moving and scaling the whole thing. Okay, so that'll keep this nice and logical. Cool. So that was weird that they didn't show up. By the way, I don't recommend naming all the bones. It's going to take a long time. They're always going to be a child of a relevant sprite. So just leave them bone 1, 2, 3, etc. Unless you're making an entire complicated skeleton, then maybe take the time to go through and rename them. The head, I want to be a child of bone 2. Okay, so think about it like this. If I bend the body, do I want the head to stay on the neck? That's why I'm putting that there. Okay, so I'm going to take the head and translate it back down to the place that makes sense, right about here, and make sure that if I rotate it, it still kind of sticks on that place, just like that. In fact, I'm going to slide it down just a little further so less of the collar is showing. And now test that if I bend the body, the head stays on. There we go. So that's the first kind of bone to sprite setup that we've done. And I like to collapse things so it's not just showing everything as I try to work. But let's go back to import and start adding more pieces. But we didn't yet set the sorting of the hips and the chest. So we know that we set the head to be 100. Well, the torso is going to appear behind the head, but it's going to have to appear in front of other things like the back leg and the back arm. Okay. And sometimes you might want something in between the two, like a collar or your arm. So I'm going to set the hips to be, How far back did I go in my head? Did I go all the way to 90? Let's set it to be 80. We don't have very much on the chest to worry about. I'm going to set it to be 80. Then the chest is going to be 81. And we also have a decal that I can put on the bone or the chest. So here's the question. Where do I want to put this? If I parent this decal to the chest, let's get it into position and see what happens. I'm going to make it 82 so we can see it. And I'll position it so that it looks correct on the chest. We might have wanted this to be a part of the art of the chest, but actually what would happen when we bent the chest t-shirt is that this decal would bend a lot and it would look really bad. That's the reason it's separate. So right now it doesn't move properly. And what about with this bone? It doesn't move there either. It's not parented to either one of those bones, and so it's not interacting. Over here, it will move if I move the entire chest sprite, but we're intending not to do that. So let's try it with just bone 1. So I've parented it to bone 1 just by clicking and dragging. So if I move bone 1, it moves. If I move bone 2, it doesn't. Does that look right? Not really. Okay. So what about bone 2? Put that on there. Okay. Well, nope, that looks bad too. So here's the thing. Do we want to add bones to the decal? Well, not really. It's a decal. It just kind of needs to move with the shirt. I don't want to animate that separately. So what I typically do is I'll put it on bone 1 if I don't want it to squish along with the rest of the bones. And I will just animate it a little bit manually to do the kind of thing I want, like squish, rotate, and place. And it's just sort of an extra step, okay? It's because I'm picky. You could easily have made this a part of the art for the chest. You could also easily put bone influence on it if you wanted to. Just go back to the Sprite Editor. But I didn't really want to do either one of those things, and so I do that. If you had buttons on a shirt, think about you don't want the buttons to squish. You just want them to move, so you want to parent them to the bones. But sometimes something that you do want to squish, like this decal, you don't want it to squish the way that object is squishing. You want it to be simpler. So in this case, it's just going to end up being a simple scale. It'll either get shorter or taller, fatter or thinner, and rotate into position. And it's not that much extra work, especially considering that the chest is not going to bend much more than this. And so I found it to be a better solution. If you want to do it differently for yours, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure you're thinking about it. Okay. Now I just want to test, is the head in front of all that stuff? Great. So we can move on to the limbs. That's the core of the body done. All right. Just to take a break for a moment to show you where we're at. We are inside the prefab right now. If we want to go back out, hit this arrow. Here's the scene. Our prefab is in the scene. We could actually test it right now with no animations. I hit play. It's going to take a second apparently. So we have no animations. The Capsule Collider is still doing its job. You can see that the sprite reverses. By the way, you must create your character facing to the left. I'm sorry I didn't mention that until now. If you need to flip your sprites, I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But because left is this visible shape and right is this visible shape, it flips it automatically with the character controller. Sorry I didn't mention that up until now, but you must make it facing left. Okay, but you can see how it all works despite the fact that it's got no animations. And now if we want to edit our player prefab further, we don't want to do it right out here where everything's blue. We want to hit this little arrow, or we want to go into the prefabs and double click this. Either way works. And now we're inside the prefab and we're editing. Just as a little aside there where I was mentioning you must illustrate this facing left. If you have illustrated it the wrong way, when you place these in, just hit this flip X button and it will flip it to the opposite way. You can see that doesn't work for children. So if you've already got a lot set up and all these other pieces are facing the wrong way, at that point you have to scale it to -1 and it will face the opposite way. So this actually would work. Let me just prove that real quick. Her head's on backwards or looking to the right. Now as I play this, it will maintain that backward looking position. So all you have to do is scale at -1 and it will fix everything. But yeah, just make sure that you've got your character facing the correct way. So I'm going to put her head back on the right way. This is also how you could animate your character, looking left and right if you really wanted to. There we go. Or use the flip X button right here. A nice simple way to do it. Cool. So now we're back to editing our character. Let's put on the arms and legs. Let's do the arms because they're simpler first. I'm going to drag this out and I'm going to parent this arm to, where do you think? We put the head on bone 2. It's probably bone 2, right? So here's going to be the rear arm, the left arm. I'm going to let it socket just behind the character right there and test that when I move this bone, that bends properly, and that looks correct, okay? We do have to add that same component. This search query is still in here. So Sprite Skin, and then create bones. There they are, okay? You could parent the bones to the bones, but I like to try to just leave them separate for simple purposes. So even though I'm moving this, the bones are moving because the sprite is moving. I find that keeps things a little bit simpler, and I'd rather not do the other way. So here we have the rear arm. You might want to name it rear arm or left arm. So I'm going to just do _L. And it's missing its hand. The hand is right here, but we need to put it on the bones. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Bone number 4, okay, is where the hand is going to be parented. There. Oh, it looks like I didn't name the hand for some reason. Put that up there. So now I just want to do that manually. I'm going to rotate it to where it's facing down the wrist. Place it to where it looks nice when I bend it either way. And you can always adjust that a little bit. And I'm just going to call this hand. I guess hand left, might as well. Be consistent. Okay. So there we go. We've set up that arm. If I position it, okay, it looks fine. We didn't set where it is going to render in the order. So right now, don't quite know what's happening. It looks like it's behind everything because I've been using such high numbers. Let's get the arm. The hips were at 80. This is the rear arm, and when I think about this, the rear arm is actually going to be behind the rear leg. If we were to make it go down, it's going to be behind the front leg. It's going to be behind the opposite arm. It's going to be behind everything. So it's going to be the lowest numbered thing. So if I think about this, the chest is at 80s. The head, the rearmost thing, is at 90. So I want the body actually to be in the 70s, I think. This arm to be 80. So it's between the two. And then the legs are all behind the torso, and then this is furthest of all. So I'm going to make this, instead of 80s, in the 70s. So this will be 70. This one will be 71. And then the decal, where did the decal go? Oh, there it is. Will be 72. Okay, so this back arm then, so if this is going to be 70, that's 80. This could be like 60 and 50, and this will be 40. So we'll say 40. And then do we want the hand to be up in front of or behind its own arm? I guess in front of, in case you wanted it to touch its own shoulder or something. But this could be vastly different too. If you wanted the character to touch your face, think about that. What would do? I'm going to bend this up like this, okay, and get the hand facing towards the face a little bit. And then, whoop, it goes behind the head. We can just barely tell that because the color is not the same. Although I am now going to change this to the same darker color now that I realize that. Let's do that. Oh, and I need to do it for the hand as well. You can keep whatever color you use for tint down in swatches down here. So wherever I adjust this, I think it was this one I used last time. Wow, that's really dark. I actually don't want that. Let's go right about there. This gray. Here's that one. I don't think so. Let's do right there. And then I'm going to grab hand and do the same one. Maybe I should just copy the hexadecimal. Forget how to add swatches. Just click down here. I don't remember. Well, anyway, I'm just going to get it visually close like that. And so what we could do is we could set the order and layer to something really, really different, like 100 or 110. so that even though the arm is behind, the hand is in front, and that allows us to sort of like touch the face. I don't want to do that. I think it's an interesting thing to do, but no. So our arm being 40, our hand is just going to be 41. But just so that you make note that you can do something like that. By the way, I've bent this arm into a new position like that. If we go back to the sprite, we can reset bind pose, and it just pops straight out again. So it's a nice way to get back to a nice neutral pose. And then, did I rotate? I've rotated the arm shape, and I didn't want to do that. So I'm going to set that to 0, and then rotate the bone. A little bit confused as to why. Reset bind pose. Okay. Well, that didn't rotate the first bone. Maybe the first bone is exempt from rotation for some reason. I didn't realize that would be the case. I just rotated it back into positive numbers just then. And maybe I should just allow this to have rotated. I'm not sure. It really doesn't matter what numbers are up in here as long as you can set them back to some sort of default 0 if you really need to. 0 straight up and down, I'm okay with that. But if I guess if I rotated down and then rotated this over, then that ends up being 0. Oh, I went the wrong way. But we could set 0 to be whatever position we wanted to. So just a little aside there. By the way, we've set up an entire arm with a hand. Why don't we just duplicate it to get the other arm? Okay. Here's what happens when we try to do that. I'm going to duplicate. It's named wrong, but that's fine. We can fix that. I'm going to bring it over here. I'm going to rotate it the opposite way, like that. I'm going to remove the color. We're just going to have white for both of these. And then I'm going to set it to, well, first name it arm right, hand right. And then I'm going to set it to render on top of the shirt. Is that okay? Yeah, actually, that is okay. As long as all the functionality needs to be the same between the two arms, you can do exactly that. Just set up one limb and duplicate it. Just do it at the root. Make sure you're doing it at the root sprite, and make sure that it's in the hierarchy the same way that you want the other one to be. So right now they're both just following the upper chest bone, and that's exactly what I want. So this sprite then is going to be in front of the shirt. So this is 70. So this is going to be 80 now, since I moved everything back. And this one's going to be 81. I'm just skipping by tens so that I can have an easy time sorting things in case I have too many pieces. But you can do it by less numbers if you want to. Okay, so we got arms. We've got arms, and they can pose. One of them is light, one of them is dark. Let's overlap them just to see how different are they. Just a little different. Visible if you look close. That's fine. And let's go ahead and set up the legs, and then we're just about done except for adjusting the body into position. Right now, if I grab the hips sprite, everything should move. Okay. If I grab the chest sprite, everything moves because it's all in the upper body. And if I move the lower bone, the entire upper body moves. Okay. So we're doing good. I'm going to go ahead and just collapse these down so that I'm not staring at a huge hierarchy. And let's drag in the leg. So here it is. I'm going to make the leg a child of the hips as well. Now, setting up 2D characters can sometimes be a little bit tricky because our feet are not going to lock to the floor. This character is going to move like a ragdoll through midair, so we're going to have to counter animate a lot. That is a simpler setup, and we're not getting to IK controls yet. We're going to do that when we get to 3D models. But just know that there's a way so that when our hips move up and down, our foot locks to the floor. We're going to get to it when we do 3D rigging. I believe there's an IK equivalent in 2D as well. Let me just check real quick. Is there an IK? Let's see, inverse. Is there a kinematic? Okay, I don't see anything that even slightly alludes to it. So maybe there isn't in this package, but I'm sure there is somewhere. And you could use 3D bones on a 2D character. And I know that there's IK available within Unity for 3D bones. So just a little aside about that. So this is going to end up being the right leg. leg R, and we want to add back in that same component, Sprite Skin, okay, which is a script, and hit Create Bones. So now we can pose and bend this leg. Make sure it's bending in the correct direction, or you can flip it. And then we want to put our boot and foot down at the bottom here. Sometimes we want to just set it up in a hierarchy that goes hip, knee, ankle, foot. Sometimes we reverse that. Sometimes we leave it out entirely. For the sake of simplicity and not confusing you, we're just going to put the boot top and the boot sole on bone 2 so that we can move them independently, because that's almost always what we're going to want to do. So I'm going to put the boot sole right about, I think it's right about here, and the boot top goes right here in the corner of it, so that I could bend and unbend this boot like that, or I could flex the toe down and up like that. And you can see there's actually quite a big gap here between this. I needed to re-illustrate that, and I just never did. So just bear that in mind. Also, the background is kind of hard to see this boot, but in the other backgrounds could be yellow, and so it'll be a lot more obvious. So I did that so that this whole foot moves with the leg, but I don't have control over moving the entire boot at once because I really don't want it. The top is just a little adjustment in the shin. The real foot is this part. Okay, so that's why I did it that way. Let's go ahead and set this back down. In fact, let me reset that pose. There we go. And we want to arrange the legs. So this is going to be the front of the 2 legs. And so with this one being 70, that one being, oops, with this one being 40. So this one's going to be 60, that one's going to be 50, these legs. So we're going to make this 60. And the boot top will make it appear on top of the sole 62. No, I want it behind 61. And I want this one on top, 62. So if this flexes up, it covers up the laces a little bit. That's okay. All right, there we go. And I feel like I didn't choose those pivot points very well, so I'm going to really quickly hop into the Sprite Editor and take a closer look, because that didn't feel right. Yeah, this is actually supposed to pivot from down here, I believe, and this one from the actual corner down there. So I'll hit apply. That will sometimes scoot around the position of your objects just a little bit, so just take them and reposition them. So it's going to be back here and back here. In fact, let me move it a little bit more generously down so that we're not constantly showing the bottom of the foot right about here. Let's see now. I could actually move it down further. Let's move it. Oh, you know what? Part of the blue is supposed to show. I don't know what I was thinking. So it's supposed to be all the way down here. Okay, so now that's a slight adjustment down there. But this can go up pretty significantly and down a little bit, although I should add more. Okay, so something more like that, and that looks better. We're supposed to see part of the ankle. But if the bones move, the foot moves. Cool. So now we can take that whole leg, duplicate it, move it over, and name it left. And then these are going to be 40, I believe. No, these are going to be 50 because they got to be in front of that, just in case they interact. 50. Forget it so easily. 50, and then the boot top was 51, and the sole was 52. Okay. So if the legs overlap, that boot goes behind, and we're going to do the same thing and change the color of this back leg just a little bit. I wish I remembered how to add a swatch. I'd probably look it up real quick, but I'm not going to. Boot top. There we go. And then the sole. Oop, I had the wrong thing. Sole. We're just going to match that visually, just like that. Okay. There we go. That is our rigged character, I believe. Let me think, am I forgetting anything? Look down at my manifest of stuff. And that looks right. We've got brows, we've got the face. I think her mouth could stand to move over just a little bit to the left. And this is sort of our T pose for this character. So the one thing we do have to do is select our original object with the Capsule Collider and realize that this is the ground plane. And so we can adjust the hips, now that they contain everything, to be at the correct height for our feet to touch the ground. And then if you really want to be picky, you could flatten these feet out entirely. Just like that. We can move them down even further, but this is going to be close enough. As long as we're not seeing like bright daylight underneath the feet, that's all that really matters. So I'm going to just slide this down a tiny bit. And it's okay if they sink down into the ground a little bit. That's actually more forgiving. Okay, so this would essentially be ready to animate. The only thing we haven't done is create an animation controller. By the way, just because I maybe didn't mention it before, the reason I have this player anim object separate from this logic object is because that makes things very, very clean, in that we could have the exact same player, the exact same controls, and just swap these out to have entirely different animation sets, potentially. The only problem with that is if your players are different sizes, we would have to do something to change the Capsule Collider size and potentially the mass, but that could be handled with a script very easily. And so this is a very flexible way to work. And it sort of guarantees that your physics aren't going to be impacted by anything in here because they don't have physics, they don't have colliders, they don't have anything. So it's just visible. And with our entire hierarchy open, which I think it is now, we can see all the pieces that we made. So let's go back to our scene. I'm going to save. This saves the scene, by the way. And if you haven't already, if this is not blue, if you never dragged it down, go to the prefabs folder and drag that in. Don't do it a second time if you've already got this symbol, right? But that's what makes this into a prefab. So down here, we could place a second or a third character if we wanted to. Let's not, but we could. So right now, if I hit play, my entire character with their feet on the ground should slide around in T-pose and hop and all that stuff and generally look like the character should. There we go. So that's pretty much done, all of our setup. So the next major phase then is animating our character. Okay, so if you get through to this point, probably take a little bit of break, double check everything, make sure it's all functioning right, and also play with your character, right? Don't just leave it here and never test it. You want to try to pose it a little bit, okay? Try moving things around, get used to how it functions, realize that if you rotate the hips, you rotate the entire character. So generally, you're not going to want to do that unless they're in midair. But for the chest, we can rotate it via these bones. And keep in mind that if I try to rotate the sprite and the bone, then I have two things that are going to appear in my animation editor. So we're going to try not to do that as well. Okay, there we go. Back to 0 right there. So just take a look at it, play with it, try to make sure it all works out properly before you get into the animation phase. Okay, so first I'm going to show you how to add our animation controller to our character and also how to do our first animation clip. Again, we do want to work inside the prefab pretty much for this, although it doesn't matter for animations because the animation is a different object, right? But anything that we change about our character, we want to do inside the prefab. So really quick, while we add the controller, I'm going to do that inside our prefab. I'm going to come to our animation folder, and I want you to right-click, create Animator Controller. Okay, Animator Controller. And you're going to name this your name controller. Where this goes is on the player anim object in this slot right here. Okay, the animator component controller, you can drag that right in, or you can click this target and you're browsing all animation controllers in the project and you've only got yours and mine. So just pick yours. Okay. That enables you to have logic in the animator. We don't need to worry about this yet. We can do all of our animation clips first, but they will appear here as tiles once you complete clips. So just know that that's what's going to happen. So back here in scene, if we go to the animation window, this is the place where we do all our animations. You notice that we have the ability to create clips down here. Okay. Sometimes if you've got the wrong thing selected, it won't even let you attempt to make an animation clip. In this case, it seems like it's smart enough to realize that we'd be making it for the component right underneath here, but sometimes it won't, and this is the thing you've got to have selected in order to make an animation clip at all. I can go back out to the scene and open this hierarchy and do this with the ground plane visible if we want to, because animations are just recordings of different parameters changing. By the way, see how I'm opening up everything one by one like an idiot? Don't do that. Don't be me. Hold down Alt, and on this first one, click, and it opens the whole hierarchy. You're welcome. I know that that was something that I felt dumb that I'd never used, so I'm with you. So we can do this whole thing out here on the scene where we've got a ground plane visible, and I kind of recommend doing that so that you can see the ground plane. All we're going to be doing is moving and rotating things here and occasionally turning on and off sprite renderers. So it's fine to do it out here. You're not really changing anything fundamental about the character. Let's go ahead and make our first clip. So down here, once we've got player anim selected, we hit create, and we want to navigate to the animations window. And you can see what I've named all of mine: idle, jump down, jump landed, etc. Name yours in such a way that you know what they are, but don't conflict with my names, otherwise you won't be able to differentiate. So I recommend using your name, just first or last name, either one, and then the name of the animation. So we're going to say name idle. You can use the character name too, by the way. Idle, and that's going to be the first one we're going to make. And this is a really important one, not only because it's going to be the first that gets played every time you see your character, but also because it's going to set the precedent of which channels we're animating, and we're going to copy paste that to all the others to try to make it as consistent as possible. I'm going to hit save. So here's what I mean. This is our blank animation down here. You preview it, nothing happens, okay? But we're going to hit record, okay? Turns pink, and you can see anything that we can turn on or off here, it's pink. Don't mess with the animator, by the way. That's just turns itself off by itself. But underneath in all of these objects, and it can be a little bit tricky, if you try to click visibly out here, sometimes you'll miss like this, and then we might have deselected the character by mistake, or I'll click a different object entirely, and now we definitely have deselected the character and we're no longer making our animation. It can be really obnoxious. So safer to select in the hierarchy. I'm going to reselect this, reselect idle right here, reselect record. We're going to go through our whole character and just add a keyframe to everything that we want to animate. Okay, just immediately. So starting with the hips, we're going to want to do what with these hips? Well, potentially move them, rotate them, possibly even scale them, right? So we're going to right click, add key, add key, add key on all three of those. And this is just serving as our T-pose right now, but that's fine. We don't have to pose anything. Now we have the ability to do those things. Are we going to want to change the sprite? No. Color? Almost certainly not. Flip it? No. Our script takes care of that. So it's just those things. Do we want to reorder it? You can animate reordering things. Not for this. There's the chance that we might want to do that for like the hands or something. But for the body, absolutely not. And it's better to leave this list a little bit less inclusive, because this is going to become a long, long list, which is hard to look through. But you don't want to leave a key off of something that you might possibly want to animate. So be as inclusive as you can, but do not just click everything. Our chest, we don't want to animate our chest sprite at all. We want to use the bones, right? We're not going to change the color. We're not going to change the ordering. We're not going to flip it. We're not going to move it. Okay, we're going to go right to the bone. And that one, we're going to click for add key on position and rotation. You don't want to scale bones. That's a bad thing typically. But position is okay. It's maybe a little bit taboo. We oftentimes don't want to change the position of bones. But in this case, bone one, that means this, moving this around. And we might want to squeeze this down or up to adjust for a rotation that doesn't quite work. So if I want to lean way back here and I get a little gap, I might want to move over a little bit. So we want to include position for most of these bones, although in some cases, maybe not. Bone number 2, both rotation and position. You can see adding themselves in down here. Then for the head is literally just a sprite. It's parented to this bone, but I may want to adjust its position for shrugging the shoulders or stretching out. So I'm going to key the position and the rotation for sure. Rotation is going to be just about everything. The scale for the head, for this one, I will go ahead and include scale because I might want a little exaggerated squash or stretch on the entire skull. So for this one, I'll include it. Might not use it. That's okay. Our left and right eye. By the way, there's so many here that we can select several like this and do add key. But did we just get a key for both of those? Yes. Okay, just wanted to make sure. For our eyes, this is our pupils. We definitely need position. We don't need rotation because they're just circular, unless you're going to do some cat eye, slit kind of thing. But now look, when I just scaled that, look what happened. Eye scale. It just added a keyframe for me. It said, oh, you're going to animate that? Okay, here you go. But be aware, if you do that in a different animation clip and don't reset it, or don't have keys for that in other clips, it might be stuck permanently that way once you enter into that animation. So I'm going to undo it, and I'm going to add key to scale at this default, because I could definitely see myself dilating the pupils, or even doing this creepy cat eye thing maybe. Who knows? Rotation, not really a thing. Unless you're going to want to lean those cat eyes, I wouldn't bother. The ears, definitely position and rotation. Probably not scale unless... No, the scale doesn't even work for these. They'd have to be oriented up and down for that. Hair, though, scale I'll include for the hair, and rotation and position, because that actually does work properly to make it appear to fly up in the air like that. So I'll include it for that. The brows, I don't really imagine me animating those at all. They're not like eyebrows that you can make angry or happy or anything like that. I know that the holes in my skull are immovable, so they're not going to change position. I'm going to just skip brows entirely. And for face, the position, rotation, and scale, because you can get a little bit of personality out of squeezing and rotating this. Again, I don't really see myself doing it in this case, but I'll just do it. This is the back shape, the yellow shape. I absolutely do not want to include this. Finally, we've got our eyelids. Our eyelids are in position, in the right scale, in the right rotation. We don't want to change any of that. The only thing we want to do is turn on and off this sprite renderer. Now it's pink, and here it is, it's added. So we have the ability to blink whenever we want to, or if you choose just one of them, to wink. Okay. The arm, we don't want to, that's everything for the head. All right, going down the list, and you probably want to double check the head, take a look, eyes, just look at every feature one time just to visually compare against what your expectations are. The arm, this is the sprite. We don't want that. We want the bones. I'm going to select all four bones, and I'm going to set a key for position and rotation, but not scale. I try to never scale bones. Then the hand, I do want the position. I do want the rotation. The scale, it's up to you, probably not. And here's where you could choose. If you had a certain kind of illustrated hand, you might want to flip its XY orientation. Or if you were intending to reach in front of the character's face, you might want to key order in layer down here. I'm going to leave those off, but I'll leave that up to you. Other arm, again, that's the sprite. Choose the bones instead. Key the position, key the rotation. And the hand, we're going to key the position and rotation, not scale for me, and not any of this other stuff. And you just want to click through, make sure that there's pink on all of the correct channels, not these, we don't want to move them. Okay, there we go. And we can move on down to the lower part of the body. You can see this goes pretty quick when you know what you're doing. So down here, we've got the decal. I almost skipped the decal because it's out of order in this hierarchy because, head, where am I going? Because it is a child of bone 1. That's why. Is it a child of bone 1? Yes. Bone 2? No, it is bone 1. Okay, just double checking. So this decal, what do I want to do with it? Position, rotation, and scale. So this is just to allow me to make it look correct on the chest. If you were going to do something like have the character turn away, you might want to even turn on and off the sprite renderer. But in this case, we're not going to do that. Okay, so open that stuff back up. Go down to the legs. This is the sprite for the legs, so we don't want that. We want the bones. Bone 1 and 2, position, and rotation. You always need the position for the root bone. You sometimes want it for the secondary bone. The reason why you might for the secondary bone is if you want to stretch. Give it a little squash and stretch kind of thing. And then the boot top and sole. I want to think about this. Rotation, yes. Do I want to squash and stretch the boot top or sole? Not really. And I kind of don't want to move them, but there's the chance that I need to move the entire boot for some reason. So I'll go ahead and keep position. What I don't want to do really is move one or the other of them because I don't think that will ever work properly. Opposite leg, there's the sprite. Here are the bones. Key. Boot top and sole, I guess it's going to be position and rotation. So it's position and rotation for just about everything, and then sometimes scale, sometimes not position, depending on what it is you're working with. So there we go. This idle animation right now is just empty of any motion, but it's got every single channel that we want in here somewhere, including all of our animatable pieces. Okay, so that's a really powerful thing to have. By the way, there's no saving animation clips. Once you've had this record thing on and it's added a keyframe, that is saved. So this is done. If you just click off this, there it is. And what we're going to do for every other clip from now on is I'm probably going to click this up here where there is no attribute. That's just select every key. Hit Control C. There is no menu for it. Just do Control C for copy and paste it as the first part of an animation clip whenever I make a new one. That will include all of these channels and we never have to do it again. So it's a one-time setup thing. Okay. So now we probably want to test drive our character by making an idle animation. So why don't we go ahead and actually do that? We want to make sure we're in record mode. We want to make sure that we are on this first frame, and we're just going to pose this character in, a more relaxed, not T pose. So it looks like they're actually doing something. So I'm going to start by just clicking and rotating these bones. And we can think, do I want my arms to bend this way in their relaxed state? Or do I actually want them to bend the opposite way? I think the opposite way. I'm going to give it just a little bit of a bend like that. Put this down. And I notice like the shoulder showing looks really weird like that. So I'm going to slide this back here. I'm going to move it forward just a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, just a little bit like that. And I'm going to rotate and unbend the arm just a little. There we go. That looks a little odd to me, actually. Maybe I do want it bent the other way, like towards the ground. Let's try this back arm. That one looks fine. Just like that. Let's try it again, going the opposite way. It's going to look like a cowboy, I think. You know what? That looks a lot better. Yeah. So bent along the contour of the body, I think, is what I want. Should I leave a little bit of daylight there? Yeah, let's leave that. Her posture, I can just leave stiff like this. I don't want to like slump her already or anything like that. Decal's fine. Hips and everything, just kind of a neutral pose. And then for the legs, we could leave them straight up and down, or I could give them a slight bend. So she looks a little bit more relaxed. I'm going to try that. Give it just a little bit of a bend so you can see that this lifts the feet off the ground. Here's how you handle this foot placement. Bend the leg however you want it, and then counter rotate the hip and try to get it so that both of them end up in the position that you want. And then finally, what we're going to do down here, oh, you know what? On my character, I included a third bone to position the whole foot. That's why it felt weird. Oops, I just clicked off. That's not a crisis. Okay, if I go back to player anim, look at idle, hit preview, all of that work was saved. So don't panic. You just have to re-enable this keyframing. So the reason it felt weird for the feet for me, I was wondering about that, is because I had a third bone for ankle position. So I'm just going to grab the two of these, rotate up. As long as they're in relatively the same position, it should be fine to rotate both at the same time. Although, oh, what a pain. There we go. That's why it's safer to click over here. But you might have to move one or the two of them forward or backward a little bit to kind of compensate. So that looks okay. And then I'm going to slide this just a little bit further down. And I may just lower the hips a tiny bit to close that gap rather than do it with the leg. But I could do it right here. There's a lot of forgiveness because they're the same color. I could adjust the hips any place that I want. And same thing over here. I've got a slight bend in this leg. I'm going to grab the boot and sole, rotate them up to flat just a little bit. In fact, I think I'll have the top forward just a little bit there. Position them. And then if I had a perspective on my ground, they'd be at different heights. Since I don't, I want them to be at the same height. So I'm going to take this one and slide it up so that we're nice flat feet like that. And then I'll take the hips and slide them down. So it does mean that our T-pose and our standard pose like this are at slightly different heights, but we shouldn't ever see that T-pose. This is what we should see, except for like the second I load the game. We will see it. So there we go. We got a kind of relaxed kind of pose there. I may want to scoot the legs a bit closer together so they overlap like this. And that looks better to me, but I actually think she did have like that cowboy kind of wide stance in the game. It's just kind of funny. She's a very funny looking character. That's okay. I'll have my feet overlap a little bit like that. That's why we've got different colors. Okay, so I can turn this off, or very last thing that you can do, often good for your clips when you start out, give it a duration. So I'm going to give this a 1 second duration by clicking this first key, copying, going to 1 second on the timeline, and then pasting, Control-V. So now I've got a 1 second duration of nothing, but it's the same pose at the start and the end. So anything extra I want to do, like bobbing the body gently or something, I can do in the middle. In fact, let me give it 2 seconds because an idle can be slower because it's more calm. And if we play that, nothing should happen. Okay, that's fine. But I'm going to turn off the preview. There's our T-pose. I'm going to hit play. And now because that's the first animation I made, it's actually already in the idle pose, which is kind of nice. I'll show what's going on in the Animator in a little while, but because we created this first, that's why it's doing this. It's kind of nice. We can see them in our nice little relaxed pose. Let's give this pose a little bit of character. If you've played, there we go. I don't know why I didn't do that the first time. If you've played a lot of games, you've probably been exposed to idle poses and idle animations before. They can get really, really crazy. Sometimes the whole character is bouncing up and down athletically the entire time they're standing still. They look like they're like hyperactive. Try not to do that in general. If you're going to do idle animation, keep it subtle. So a little bit of left and right leaning, a little bit of up and down movement on the hip, and that's just about all. You really don't want to go too crazy with it. I'm going to do 1 second worth of slow movement down and 1 second worth of slow movement back up to the top. And I may even just give it a little circle, like a little forward and back. But if I do this too much, it's going to be obvious and look really dumb. And they have a tendency to. So I'm going to just drop the hips right there, just a tiny bit, and then adjust my feet so that those bottoms of the feet are still on the ground and hopefully still in the same vertical line too. So what we can do is take a look at the front, the back like that. In fact, do I have my hotkeys? There we go. So I was trying to see, can I flip between, oh, it's this one. There we go. Next keyframe, previous keyframe. Using these buttons right here can be important for this sort of thing because we can compare minutely like that. So I can tell that I need to move this foot back further. And then also re-rotate it. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to re-rotate this back to flat, but it's okay if the top of the boot bends. I just wanted to move them together. So now I can go back, forward, back, forward. So I'm comparing. And I can see that this is significantly further forward than this one is. So I have to slide this forward again. It's a very, very slight movement right about there. Okay, and I think I have to rotate just a little bit. So I'm being quite picky about this. Can I click safely? No. Darn. Okay. Go back to the correct point in the timeline. Make sure that pink is on so that you're animating things. And let's see, here's the boot sole. Rotate down. I'm getting very, very up close just because I don't want it to visibly slide across the ground, but really the amount that that's moving is minuscule. So we're probably already fine, but I can just scoot it up and forward a tiny bit. There we go. Just so it doesn't slide all over the place. This other foot, on the other hand, is moving quite a bit. Okay, so there we go. We can, if you play it, you can actually see where it wanders to. So it's wandering forward at this point. Okay, so I want to bend this back a little bit more. And we could also, we could retract the hips by like moving that bone up a little bit, I suppose. I'd rather not do that. Move this up a little, rotate it back a little bit. Get the top leaned in. Check it. Okay, not too bad. I think I need to bend the leg a little bit more though. A bit forward and a bit back to get it higher up. Just trying to work it left and right. So as I bend this more and more, right, it's going higher and higher as I'm doing that. And then I just want to get the right position and then rotate both of these to where the foot is flat again. Let's check. Oh, that's just about right. Yeah, that's just about right. Move barely. And then the top, I just want to make sure it's not going outside the ankle anymore. Right there. So let's see. Now if I play that. Okay. So that works. You can see it kind of wanders a little tiny bit. But now I'm going to zoom way out, show the whole character. And let's just, yeah, click there. Hand tool there. I just want to get that out of there. Does that look natural? Is it moving too much? Right? I think it's moving too much, honestly. Like already. And it's very easy to do. What I can do though, a nice little trick to do, is you can use some more traditional in-betweening tricks. If you want this to bend less, then here's the maximum amount of bend at 1 second. And here's 50% at frame 30. And here's 0% at frame 1. If I want this to bend exactly half as much, I could go right here and right click, add key. This just added a keyframe on every attribute on the entire character. I'm going to click this one. That selects every key on this frame. Delete it. And then click and drag this over to 1 second. Now guess what? We've got half the amount of distance. So that can sometimes really save you a lot of work. The only downside is now I've got a keyframe on everything else, but well, who cares? It's not really doing anything. And I'm about to pose those arms and things anyway. Okay. You can do the same trick just with individual channels. You just have to be careful about reading the names down here. Let's pose the arms then. So what the legs are doing is bouncing up and down. So at the lowest point here, I think the arms just need to be out a little bit. Oop, I've got everything selected still. There we go. The arms just need to be out a tiny bit and then probably bent a little bit more. So they move out and bend in just a little bit. Okay, And since I was still recording, that's what ends up happening. Just a tiny little ambient motion. Sort of looks like, I don't know, she's doing invisible dips or something, but whatever. So we could add a little bit more to that if on the first half here, we want to lean the character a little bit forward. Keep doing that. Keep doing it. There we go. Hips. Let's let's not do it with the hips because that means I'll have to remove the legs. Let's do the chest. I'm going to just lean the chest a tiny bit on bow number 2 forward. Oh, sorry, I did that on frame 1. I want to do it on frame 30. There we go. Just a little bit on frame 30. And then over here, I'm going to lean it just a little bit back. And so in the middle, it's neutral, and on the start and end, so the playback of the animation is kind of halting at the end. I can handle that in just a moment. But look how lifelike that suddenly makes it, just a little bit of back and forth. So this is going left and right. That's going up and down. The arms are going from out to in and back again. And now suddenly it feels a lot more alive. I'm not doing anything with the face or the head yet, which I probably need to, but it's already feeling a little bit better. So if I leaned the chest forward a little bit, what I'm going to do with the head is lean it a little bit back to counter it. And then over here, I'm going to lean it a little bit down, just so that the head kind of maintains its level a little bit better. We could also move the head around, so we could move it up and down, move it left and right, whatever. Okay. So the reason why the playback is halting like that is going to be in the curves editor. So we did already animate once before in Unity, but I just want to show again that the curves editor does exist and it does have purpose. Let's select, I'm going to go back to the dope sheet and select everything and then go to the curves editor. That way I can hit F and then zoom out. We should be able to see. Trying to frame everything. There it is. We can't really see it, but these curves, these tangents are doing something weird right now. They're sort of easing in and out at a point that I don't want them to. So I'm going to just frame everything, grab all of it, right-click on a key, there we go, and then just do clamped auto, I think is the safest one, and then play and see if that changes anything. No, it's kind of coming to a halt every time. Oh, I know what's wrong, I think. It wasn't that. Let's go back to the dope sheet, deselect. If I, come on, let me deselect. Can I deselect? Well, I had every frame selected. I don't think my first pose is the same as my last anymore. Let's try that. Is that the same? No, those are the same. Okay, so what's happening? I think it's just that it's coming to a halt at the end. That's the deal. Yeah, it's just kind of coming to a halt at the end. So let me see, what can we do to fix that? I want to say that this is something that can be fixed in the curves editor, but maybe I have to play with different settings. Let's try just auto, or maybe even free smooth. Auto, how's that one play? Well, that's better. So not clamped auto, but just auto. Now I don't see that halt. Let's try free smooth and see what that does. So all of these settings, by the way, are taking the positions of other animation information and changing the pitch of the tangent handles. So for one particular example, let's just look at the hips alone. Hips rotation. I'm just going to click that. And this is really badly scaled for some reason. Let's see. Or am I not rotating the hips at all? I know I'm moving them, so let's do position. There we go. Position Y. There we are. At least it's something we can see. I'm doing Shift, Alt, and right-click to scale, like that. And then Alt, middle mouse to move that position. So you can see here, this up-down on his hips is very sharp, where the clip starts and ends. and that's going to create a sudden motion. But what it was doing before on everything was clamped auto, and that was stopping everything, which doesn't work on all the rotations. On this one, this movement, it actually looks fine, but on the left and right rotation, it was making it worse. So I think that would have been bone number 2 rotation. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Bone number 2's rotation here and here, you can see it's smoothly traveling. This is the repetition of the first part of this animation. If I grab this and change it to clamped auto, there's what it was doing. There's the hiccup. Stops in the middle of what should be a motion. So instead, just auto is better. What would be even better than that, though, is if I grab these manually, and maybe even this one, and just made that ease in, ease out in an even smoother way. I want to be careful about that, though, because if you have too many things that are rotating and posing all at once, you may have to go through and do that for each and every one of them to make it look right. In this case, it's very, very subtle. We're not really going to get any problems from that, but just be careful. So then finally, just to give this a little bit of extra, I like to at least include a blink if it's a full idle. So we'll have it stare, and then right here before the second position in our body, I'll have it blink. So right at this moment, let's get eyelids, turn on the sprite renderer. It should be off right up until the moment that it turns on, right there. And then I'm going to let it stay on for a few frames. I guess that's 5 frames or so, and then turn it back off again. And that should be fast enough, but also visible. Yeah. Let's say, I think it's like 1/6 of a second or so. Just one single blink. Let's give the ears something to do also, so that the whole face is not completely static like that. Start and end positions I don't really want to change, but I'll have the ears twitch, maybe. Yeah, let's do a twitch. Ear left. Okay, so I'll have it move down and then slowly rise back up. And then I'm going to copy. So if I want to see where this ear is, just scroll down until you see diamonds. So this is the ear because it's the only thing I add keyframes to. Then I'm going to copy this position and then paste it right here. Okay, so that'll just do one rapid little flicker. Almost like she's slightly irritated, and it happens before the blink, so just a little bit of something. And I may want the other ear to just do something too. Let's have the other ear raise up but not do the flick, and it's going to go a lot less. So now that would be this one, and copy that default position, and I'll have it reset a little bit later. There, just a little sympathetic motion in that other ear. We could also have the eyes doing little darts. So what eye darts are when you scan something and you kind of look around a little. So this character kind of looks dead. Most characters do if their eyes don't move at all. And so I can just have the character's eyes changing position very, very slightly around in kind of a circle, and it will look like they're scanning the world around them. So at this point, I'm going to key the position without it having changed. So that's maintained right up until that position. And then 2 frames later, I'm going to have them take on a new position, slightly different. And I'll copy. In fact, what I should probably just do is stepped tangents for this, rather than doing double keyframes all the time. So I'm going to show the whole curve for the eyes, grab everything, and then right-click and just do both tangents constant. So what this will do, if I zoom back in here, find just one of them. There it is. What you can see is it'll hold the previous position until the next position and then change instantly. So there's no motion. It just teleports. I actually prefer there to be a little bit of motion, which is why I was doing the 2-frame thing. But this is going to be simpler to understand. Let me zoom back out. All right, so now at new position, hold for a few frames. Oh, I don't have both of them selected. There we go, both of them. And then new position, new position, and then I'm going to just do nothing for a while. We can get rid of this pose. Okay. And then on the second part, I'll do a few more quick ones. We'll go down, up, hold for twice as long. And then this one, in the blink, is a good opportunity to, when it comes back out from the blink right here, open, would be a good opportunity to do a couple more. So we'll go up, down, and then probably want to end on the same position that we started on. So I'll come over here and copy these two. Copy, and then paste. So that's maybe a bit too much. Yeah, and I keep going down instead of up, so it's like repeatedly going downward. So let's fix those first couple. And also make sure everything is still stepped. There we go. Got everything framed. Constant, good. Okay. So now in this first half, so the first one I have them go down. Instead, I'm going to have them go up. And then this one, I'll have it stay up and slightly to the left. And then this one returns back to neutral. Yeah, it's a bit too much, really. I think I need to have fewer. So what we could do is stretch them out, as in select these, and then move their positions so that the darts happen less, or I could reduce the number of them. And I think that I do want to get rid of just entirely this one, and this one, this one. So it's happening less often. There, that's way better already. So it's still moving around, and you can see it particularly because I've got the manipulator, but it's hardly noticeable until you really stare at the cat's face. All right, so let's see how that plays in our scene. You might think there's no difference there because there's no movement yet, but all of our manipulators and all of our bones are no longer visible, so we can just see the cat as it's going to render, which can help. There we go. Plays better at 100%, by the way, just one time scale. Okay. The hair's not doing anything, but I don't think it has to. It's spiky little hair. And we don't even really see any problem with the decal because she's not moving enough in the chest to make that thing squish. So that's a pretty successful little first animation. Okay. Keep in mind the number of animations that you need to do as you work through them. You can take a look in the animations folder. You need an idle. You need 3 different kind of jumps. So that would be heading upward, midair, and heading downward. And then you need a walk cycle and a run cycle. So those are all of them together. If you want to view, there we go. Let's save our scene. If you want to view the animation editor, sorry, the animator for the original character, all you have to do is go inside the prefabs, go inside My Player, and click Player Anim, and then you can see how all of this is set up. But what we're going to do is I'm going to skip ahead to where I've already animated these things, And I'll just use my existing one as an example because you can execute your own animations for all the rest of those. And I'm going to hook up this logic so that it plays back properly. Okay, that will be the next step. So currently in here, what you'll have is just this. So there's the one animation that you made, orange attached to the entry, and nothing else. Once you fill in the rest of your animations, they'll just be gray tiles that cascade down here. Okay, so that's what we're going to do as our next step. All right, so I've jumped ahead to where I have all of the animations already in the Animator and have been completed in the animation window down here. You can see them in the drop down. So I just wanted to show you where we're going to stop for this assignment because the Animator itself and hooking up the logic is an entire task unto itself, and it's a pretty important one. So we're going to stop at the point where you have all of your different animation clips that we can play back so that we can look at them, but we're not going to hook up this internal logic until the next assignment because it takes quite a lot of work to explain both what's going on, setting the parameters for this. There's things that need to be read from physics, which I'm going to have provided for you, but I don't want you to have to worry about in this assignment. So once you've got this all set up, they don't need to be visible in the Animator, but they will be in the order that you execute them. This is the full list, and I have one extra here. So the idle, the run cycle, and that's all you need is holding still and full speed. You could add other clips like walking or jogging, and sometimes by doing that, you increase the quality of your animation transitions, but you also have to be careful about that because the timing is important. If the timing of your jog is different from your run, you can create really weird, bizarre looking animation transitions. But if it's the same, then it can look really great. We've got jumping down, midair, and up. I'll show what all these look like in a second. And then I added one extra landed where the character bends their legs at the bottom of a jump in order to stand back up. You don't need that, but if you want to provide that, go ahead. I don't recommend providing a push off the ground. Just go ahead and do this jump up as that push off the ground. Let me show you what these all look like, even though you've already seen them before in the previous part. But here's our character. I select the player anim. Let's show idle. So that's previewing. Okay, so I actually had a 3-second idle on the original. The run cycle. There we go. I had a 1 second long run cycle. So 2 steps per second, and that's pretty reasonable. Runs should be quick. So 1 whole second to do the entire cycle is pretty good. You could do a little faster than that if you wanted to, but we also have control over the playback speed in the Animator, which is an important thing to note. We can speed things up and slow them down to sort of adjust them, and that's a really great feature. Let's do the jump up. So it looks like that. I've actually got the pushing off the ground portion, but you could reasonably just have this portion where they're sailing up into the air and probably give it a little bit of animation just to keep it alive, but not very much. Things like hair blowing in the wind or the ears twitching, but nothing major, because these blend together very quickly. So any large action is not going to read properly. Okay. I've also used squash and stretch on my bones by moving them apart. Do that with caution. If you don't want to do that, that's completely reasonable. I'm sort of breaking what the rig is supposed to do by doing that, but I felt that it enhanced my animation. So don't feel that that's a requirement necessarily. Midair looks like this, and it's just nothing. This is a place where I really probably should have given it a little bit of wobbling back and forth, especially if this was a game if you could be held in midair by like a fan or anti-gravity. Having just this will look dead. And so having, similar to the idle where the arms and legs are just kind of wobbling back and forth, would have made a lot of sense. But that's what I have, and it works properly. And then jump down. Looks like this. Okay. And it's really hard to imagine these things separate until we get to the animation logic. But if I would have to reload the other controller. Maybe I will in just a bit to re-show. But once you have the animation logic and you can see the transitions, it makes a lot more sense. Then we've got landed in my case, where it just does that. And like I kind of explained in the first part, this bit we don't really even see. It just transitions back to idle or running, depending on what we're doing. Okay. And then I think that's it. Yeah, so that's all of them. So this is just a little example controller so that I could show what everything will look like. This is the required list: idle, run, jump down, midair, and jump up. You don't need landed, but you can provide it if you want. And you don't need intermediary moving clips, but you can if you want to. That's all the control we're going to have, though. We're just going to be able to move and jump. That's it. So now let me go ahead and hook up the other, the original Animator controller. So you can see, here's a little bit better example down here when we have blend trees, and I'll show you how to make them. We can play, and then I can move this parameter. And it really looks very odd down here, but it looks correct in the game view. It's just because I'm using sprites, and apparently some of them are facing away from camera, and it doesn't like Unity's bone system, but you can see the hands and feet. So here at a very low speed, this is what it would look like. It's a blend between idle and running. And that's kind of odd, which is why sometimes we want a walk cycle. I actually loaded in my run cycle twice so that I could play it fast for getting up to speed and then slower to get into the main stride. But that's exactly where you could slot in a walk cycle if you wanted to, or a sprint cycle or something like that. So that's kind of interesting, but the nicer one I think is the jump tree. So if I zoom in here and hit play, there's not really much point in hitting play because these don't really do very much, but so there's pushing off, midair, and fall. So I'll just stop the playback and just do the blend. So up, midair, and fall. And you can kind of imagine from looking at the hands how they progress from one to the other smoothly. But if we had small animation loops like in here, then the hands would sort of wobble up and down because that's what the midair is doing, and the feet would sort of kick back and forth a little bit. That could be a really good addition to your animation, and I encourage you to do it. Because it would probably enhance it and give you more to play with. The worst case scenario, you try doing that sort of thing and it doesn't look right, and then you just delete out that animation and go with a still pose like I have in order to make it play properly in the end game. So let me go ahead and hit play just to demonstrate this live one last time. Do I need to? Okay, yeah, there it goes. Game view. Oh. Did I not hook it all back up? Oh, I was doing it inside this instead of inside the character that's on the scene. Let's see. So I need to put the right prefab up there. My mistake. So I'm just going to turn this one off, leave this one on, and it should be fine. There we go. So you can see how that transitions, despite the fact that they're really just poses. You can also see some of the ugliness and the pinching in the legs that probably needs to be better paint weighted. Okay. And there's the transition. The transition's so fast from walking to running. You can sort of see how there's an initial frenzy of activity before I get up to full speed, and then the character settles down into a more solid run. And if we run and jump, then this transitions back into movement rather than back into idle. Looks a little bit weird, but I think it's fine. There we go. Just for a test to show that it's possible, if I reduce the amount of gravity that's affecting the character, let's change it to 1. You can see the transition take place slower. And if I hold the jump button, we can see that it glitches by playing the first part of that clip over and over again. So that would be undesirable, right? But I set up my clip to make sense with the gravity scale that we had. Let me change it to 2. It was at 3. Even at 2, we get to travel upward for just a little bit too long. I could break that animation into 2 clips, one that is just the pushing, one that is just the traveling upward, and then it would solve that glitch. But then my blend tree would look slightly different, and my transitions would look slightly different. It means that in here, I would have one extra animation right here that quickly transitions away, and then the jump tree would be just traveling upward, which would be fine, but it's not something that I needed to do in this case. So if I go back to my player, increase gravity back to 3. So we never really get that glitch. Maybe I do see it a little tiny bit if I hold the spacebar as long as possible, but we can't travel upward far enough to trigger that. And so we're just fine, but really I'm kind of playing with fire there. I should have done a better job. But there you go. There's everything that you're going to be required for this week, and next week we'll set up the animator properly, get all the logic moving, and then move on to 3D characters. All right, thank you.